Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Mary Hope Lee, and I'm a member of the Phoenix Advisory Committee of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. And I want to welcome you here on behalf of the Phoenix Caravan for Peace with Justice and Dignity Coalition. There's a bumper sticker that says, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. Well, the Phoenix Caravan for Peace Coalition has been paying attention, and we are outraged that since 2006, 7,000 people in Mexico have died, 10,000 have disappeared, and 160,000 have been internally displaced by what is called the war on drugs. In this country, millions have been incarcerated for nonviolent, drug-related crimes, largely blacks and Latinos. This evening, Javier Cecilia and families affected by the war in Mexico will come to draw attention to this binational human rights crisis that involves gun trafficking, money laundering, and poses a serious threat to public health and cries out for an alternative to prohibition. 3 people are here to speak with you this morning. They are Judge Jim Gray from Orange County, California. His book is Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed and What We Can Do About It, a judicial indictment of the drug war. Marina Farrell from the Phoenix Allies for Community Health, and Nicolas de la Fuente from the Worker Rights Center, Arizona.
Well, thank you, and it's just a pleasure to be here. It's time that our country recognizes this failed policy of drug prohibition. I state, and I mean it, that drug prohibition is the biggest failed policy in the history of our country, second only to slavery. It has its tentacles, and that's exactly what I mean to say, in pretty much everything that's going wrong in our country and around the world today. You know, we're dealing with 2 problems here. One is drug harms, and I'm not minimizing them. But if you look at the entirety of it all, drug harms are about 10%. Drug prohibition harms are 90%. It's drug money that's causing these deaths in Mexico. It's drug money that is causing this corruption in Mexico, Afghanistan, around the world, and certainly in our country as well. Just ask yourself, if you want to take care of our children, which is probably the reason why people are still continuing with drug prohibition for all of its defects, quote unquote, because they're doing it to save our children, to keep them protected from the lifestyle of drug usage and drug selling. But honestly, I've been in juvenile court. I'm a former federal prosecutor. I was a judge in California for 25 years. You see this almost daily, where drug prohibition is putting our children in harm's way for 2 extremely important reasons. One is, ask them. Don't take my word for it. Ask the next 10 teenagers you find, what is easier for you to get today if you want to? Marijuana or alcohol? And they'll all tell you, if I want to, it's much easier to get marijuana. Why? Because the alcohol is regulated and controlled by the government, and the illegal marijuana or other drugs are controlled by illegal drug dealers, and they don't ask for ID. So that's a huge problem that is caused by drug prohibition. Secondly, if I were a drug dealer, how much risk-taking can I buy for $50 in cash from a 15-year-old, 16-year-old in the inner city or anywhere else? And the answer is a whole bunch. You know, $50 is nothing to a drug dealer, but to a kid, it's a lot of money. So I recruit them, and I use them as gophers, lookouts, couriers, whatever. And then, and I would see this in juvenile court all the time, as night follows day, as soon as their reliability is established, we trust them to go out and sell small amounts of drugs in the communities. Well, let me ask you, if you're having a 15, 16-year-old selling drugs in his or her community, who are they going to sell to? People like us? No, they're going to sell to their 14, 15, 16-year-old peers, thus recruiting more children to this very lifestyle of drug usage and drug selling that we say we're trying to keep away from them, and it is caused by drug prohibition. Today you do not see children on high school campuses selling Jim Beam bourbon to each other, but they're selling methamphetamines and marijuana and everything else all the time because there's money in it. Today you do not see Mexican drug cartels raising illegal vineyards in our national forests in competition with Robert Mondavi. Why? Because they could, but there's no money in it. Today, if Coors Beer is having a distribution problem with Budweiser, they do not take their thugs to the streets with guns. They file a complaint and bring it to judges like me because it's regulated and controlled. So focus on the big issue here. The term controlled substances is the biggest oxymoron of our lives today. Why? Because as soon as you prohibit a substance, you give up all of your controls whatsoever to the bad guys. Anything regarding quality, huge problem. Quantity, price, place of sale, age restrictions, licensing, it's all in control of the bad guys. So look, in Arizona and around the world, let's regulate and control these drugs. Let's take a whole lot of money away from juvenile gangs, Mexican drug cartels, and all the violence and corruption that goes with it, and instead spend that money to pay our firefighters, pay our teachers, and fix our highways. It makes perfect sense. Last comment. Hemp, for heaven's sake, is a viable industrial product. Why tobacco manufacturers and other large agricultural interests haven't figured this out absolutely baffles me, because we are importing hemp from that radical country to our north called Canada, and we're using it then for our clothing, for plywood, for lacquer. You can go to, this isn't supposed to be an advertisement for a particular group, but if you have Trader Joe's here, they have Trader Joe's hemp seed granola, for heaven's sake. Let's stop punishing our manufacturers and agricultural industry and legalize hemp. So let's get rid of this violence, stop killing people here and around the world, particularly in Mexico, Afghanistan, or wherever. Regulate and control these drugs, and everybody will be better off. To the degree that within 2 years, when we finally regulate and control marijuana, everybody will join hands and be aghast that we could have perpetuated such a failed system for so long. Let's get at it. The applause was deafening.
So I'm a midwife that works here in Arizona, and I've also worked along the border of Juarez and El Paso, Texas, and Chiapas and Guatemala. I have lived and worked in both of those places as well, and that's where my family is from. And so because I do maternal health, I've really been able to witness the devastation of the war on drugs has actually brought to families. And so I'm sort of here to talk about the health, sort of the perspective of health. And so I'm going to kind of read so I don't miss any points, but the war on drugs has had this effect of applying sort of racist and discriminatory policies on families that are living in underserved communities. And it's created this paradigm in the United States that drug addicts are these criminals from poor neighborhoods that are obtaining all of their drugs from criminals across the border. Yet in this country, opiate withdrawal and the number of babies that are addicted to opiates has tripled between 2000 and 2009. The use of Oxycontin and other so-called legal drugs has exploded in this country, and according to Fortune magazine, last year alone, 254 million scripts were filled for opiates in the United States, which is enough to medicate every United States citizen, adult United States citizen living here 24/7 for an entire month. We've given pharmaceutical companies an enormous range of economic and healthcare power, and yet wage a war on drugs that specifically target certain demographics of people, which maintain racist ideologies and alternatively support law enforcement and prisons, while at the same time causing situations for greater corruption within our law enforcement system. Again, more babies are born addicted to opiates in this country than any drugs that are coming across the border, and addiction to prescription drugs is steadily killing more people in this country. Models such as Portugal, in which the government has been focusing on treatment and prevention instead of jailing drug users, has shown a dramatic decrease in deaths and infections, as well as including healthcare workers in their penal or judicial decision making. So this has the effect of looking at the use of drugs from a healthcare perspective as the illness of addiction and considering treatment options instead of incarceration, which we know has not been shown in any way to be an effective deterrent to drug use. When the policymakers of the Americas can look at the health outcomes of the current international treaties, it has the effect of equalizing the playing field where all drugs are looked at individually. If one considers that prescription legal drugs are more responsible for death in this country from addiction, and that the war on drugs has created a situation of violence for people who live in Mexico and along the U.S.-Mexico border, it becomes harder as a healthcare worker to defend a policy that is in effect neither based on the realities of what our statistics show as being heathen. The war on drugs serves to incarcerate seriously ill individuals without treatment plans that are effective, separates the families, takes the focus off what the pharmaceutical industry in this country is doing, and the profit from the use of opiates and other prescription drugs, while at the same time, there are poor families that don't have access to, so it's actually easier to obtain more expensive drugs than for people that don't have the money to buy less expensive pain-killing drugs. They have no access to that. So to me, this issue of legal drug use and its dangerous implications for the future of health in this country, along with all of the death of the innocents on both sides of the border, is reason enough to do away with the prohibitionist and racially dividing policies. So the crimes which are increasing in this country are committed by people addicted to pharmaceutical drugs more often, and is using our police force to pursue marijuana users the best use of their time and resources, and is the increasing corruption of the same police caused by the prohibition of certain drugs doing anything but placing more innocent people in danger. So when I worked in Juarez and in El Paso, this was during the early 2000s when more and more women were disappearing in Juarez. And we know that those disappearances in Juarez, as well as the extensive number happening now, are happening because of the corrupt police force there and those involved in the distribution of non-medical drugs. Juarez used to be a place, because I remember it well growing up there and living there, that we would walk and meet at night, and it was really joyful. And now the doors and the windows are closed by 5 o'clock. You can't even have birthday parties there anymore. It's so dangerous. And the Mexican government refuses to acknowledge this. My own parents fear even going to their home in northern Chihuahua because of the amount of death that they have already witnessed. So this fear has nothing to do with the guy smoking a joint next door. Okay, it just has nothing to do with that. So we know statistically that the international drug treaties over the past 50 years have neither prevented the illicit production and non-medical use of those drugs, nor, outside of developed countries, made these drugs adequately available for medical use for those who truly need them. So it's also a humanitarian issue. Thank you very much.
Hello, good morning. My name is Nick de la Puente, and I'm part of the coalition that helped to put together the arrival of the Peace Caravan today at 6 p.m. In Phoenix. And I want to say something to be very clear to begin, that I'm not speaking on behalf of the coalition, that I'm speaking to commonalities and to the general understandings that brought our group together in the first place. And first and foremost, we understand that there needs to be an overall shift, a paradigm shift in the U.S. economy as far as job creation, profit generation, and foreign aid and domestic aid based on human suffering. We need to move towards human dignity with these policies. So the caravan tonight is going to bring a lot of stories, sad stories, of the sheer amount of violence that is happening in Mexico at this time. I can't speak to that violence. I'm not going through that. I hope that you all will attend that event and hear about what's going on there. What we can speak to is the moral responsibility as residents of the United States to address the arms trade and to address our foreign and domestic policies. So speaking to the 50,000, 70,000, 100,000 deaths, depending on which numbers you want to use in Mexico, on the flip side of that is the profit. So a lot of times what's talked about in the media is the lax gun shows, the lax gun shops along the border that are smuggling guns into Mexico. That's a huge problem that needs to be dealt with. But what's not talked about is the billions of dollars in commercial sales, direct commercial sales, sanctioned by the U.S. State Department and sent to Mexico. Those are U.S. corporations making billions of dollars off of the violence taking place in Mexico. A Apart from that is the U.S. policy, specifically Plan Merida, Plan Mexico, that has spent hundreds of millions of dollars sending arms to Mexico, 85% of which are regardless of whether or not Mexico adheres to the policies within that agreement, human rights policies within the Plan Mexico. So there's the profit, and then there's the suffering. That's the Mexico side. In the United States, as has already been addressed, we have the largest prison population in the entire world. This has been talked about for years, been documented for years. But on the flip side, again, of that is the billion-dollar industry, the private prison industry. So there's the human suffering, and there's a private prison industry. Apart from that is the tens of thousands of jobs that are created in the prison industry. So we understand as a coalition that this is a very complicated, multi-pronged problem, and that it's going to take courageous leadership on a local level to create alternative models away from profit generation, job creation, and aid based on human suffering. We need to move towards jobs based on human dignity. There's models out there that we can use as examples when we get there, but what's going on right now is completely backwards, and it's our moral imperative to stand up and speak to these policies that create violence and suffering throughout the Americas and across the world.
Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask? Lots of stuff to cover. Answer them all. Sir.
I had somebody tell me that they were of the perception that most of the violence is occurring on the border and not in the other regions of Mexico. And I wonder if anybody has any comments on, is the violence pervasive across Mexico? Do you think it's focused on the border? What do you say?
I believe that the violence is closer to the border, but it's also throughout the country. It just depends. If you take some member of some cartel and arrest them, frequently, of course, then there's a power structure to replace that person. One cartel is fighting another, and that's throughout Mexico. So it really kind of depends where in a particular area. We're talking about Ciudad Juarez, which is just a very violent place. Tijuana was a very violent place. Down in Guadalajara was, it goes all throughout the country. Wherever the money is, that's where the violence comes. And by the way, AIDS follows along closely. That does not have to be, but you can look at a map of any area in the world in which they're starting to distribute narcotics, and AIDS follows about 5 years thereafter. So it's all pervasive, I think, is your answer. The whole deal here is money, guys. In fact, you in Arizona are literally, your police force is being bribed by the federal government. They are giving you money to the police with the express requirement that you have to continue to fight the war on drugs. It's money. In fact, I was in the offices of 2 sitting congressmen a few years ago in Orange County, where I'm coming from, and they told me, Jim, most people in Washington realize the war on drugs is not winnable, but it's eminently fundable, and they're addicted to the drug war funding. It's money for the bad guys that's driving this bus, and it's money for the good guys as well. The answer is it's money, and it's up to us to trump that. Do not expect the government to lead the charge for change, because they are addicted to that drug war funding. It's up to us.
That's right, Jim.
If I may add to that, there are cartels on both coasts, the Atlantic coast and the Pacific coast. There is a cartel in the north. So wherever there are cartels, there's violence. And this caravan did not pop up out of nowhere in Tijuana this past weekend. Javier Cecilia, whose son was killed as a result of these activities, is a famous poet. But he wrote his very last poem for his son, and he hasn't written a poem since. He's been involved with this campaign. And there was a caravan through northern Mexico, and there was a caravan through southern Mexico. And now the caravan is coming to the United States because this is a bi-national issue.
What do you think is the most commonly misunderstood aspect of this situation in Mexico with the violence by the American public?
I would say that it's an extremist narco issue. That there's a bunch of crazy drug dealers terrorizing the population. without a holistic analysis of the monetary incentive involved in the billions of dollars that are made via U.S. Corporations and the underground market as well, and the fact that drugs are illegal here shoots up the price for these illegal drugs. So people can make the argument that, well, if they shift away, if we decriminalize drugs in the United States, they're going to shift to another form of trafficking, extortion, whatever the case may be. That doesn't excuse the fact that we're fueling the problem. If your neighbor's beating your kid and you know that, you don't go give them a bat to beat your kid.
You know, we are seeing now, fortunately and finally, a movement around the world. Not only President Vicente Fox, now that he is speaking publicly the same way we are with regard to we must regulate and control drugs. President Molina in Guatemala is saying the same thing. Uruguay now is, as I understand it, very close to having the government actually sell these drugs. And you can go to Europe as well. Portugal has decriminalized all drugs. Back in 2001, for heaven's sake, where is the attention to this? It's working well. They've resulted in a decrease of 50% problem drug usage in Portugal over the last 10 years. So it is moving. The problem is every day it delays. We have more violence, more deaths, more corruption, more poison, more lack of medical attention. So these are things that the people need to do. We need to get this word out and regulate and control this. I am a former Superior Court judge in Orange County, speaking publicly for more than 20 years about this. Governor Gary Johnson out of New Mexico has been speaking about this. So are many more people. It's time to revolutionize this whole approach and bring these drugs under control and reduce the violence so that we can get Javier writing his poems again.
That's right. Thank you, Jim. That's right.